We bring in Brian Geltzeiler, who does a great job on SiriusXM NBA Radio, also a contributor at NBA TV, has covered the NBA for a long time, and he's kind enough to join us right now. Brian, appreciate the time. How you been, my man?
I'm good, Zach. Pleasure to be with you, buddy.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. So what was your reaction when you saw this news a little while ago that not only Michael Malone was getting fired by the Nuggets, but also their GM in Calvin Booth?
Well, it was interesting. When seeing Malone get fired, I was obviously, with 3 games left in the regular season, see a championship coach on a championship contender lose his job was utterly shocking to me. With all that said, it wouldn't have been shocking to me if it happened in the offseason, because the Malone-Calvin Booth relationship has been god-awful for this entire season. It's one of the worst-kept secrets in NBA circles. You know, Malone is not happy with how Calvin Booth has used draft picks. For Denver, because they're a team that's not going to go into the second apron, they have an ownership group that's very conscious of paying too much money in luxury tax. They want their player costs to commensurate with their revenue, and they don't want this to be a losing proposition. And there's been a lot of criticism in NBA circles about that ownership group not committing more money in this Jokic era to doing what they have to do. But when you are not going to go deep into the tax, what you do draft-wise, the cost control talent that you bring in is going to be really important. And Bruce Brown and Jeff Green left 2 years ago from that championship team. They didn't bring Kentavious Caldwell-Pope back. And outside of Christian Brown, they haven't really replaced the guys they lost all that adequately. And guys like Julian Strawther and Peyton Watson have not played in the way Michael Malone needs them to play for them to be bench contributors on this team. Even Zeke Naji, who Booth liked a lot. They paid him a contract. He didn't play a lot. He's not very good. The problem with Denver is they don't have more than 6 guys that they can use. And Malone is angry at Booth for it. And Booth is angry at Malone because he doesn't feel like he spent enough time developing the Watsons and the Strawthers. So there's a big disconnect there. And obviously, Josh Kroenke today got sick of it all and said, ripping the Band-Aid off. I don't want to deal with this stuff going into the playoffs. The 2 of you guys are gone. Very important to note, David Adelman, son of former NBA coach Rick Adelman, highly, highly respected. The people I spoke to today think he can do a fantastic job stepping right in there because of the experience that he has, the relationships that he has, the reputation that he has. Very, very different than what Memphis did with Tomas Asalo, who doesn't have experience like that, doesn't really have an NBA resume. This is different. David Adelman does have an NBA resume, and there is confidence, I've heard, within the Nuggets organization that they can win with him.
So just on Thursday or Friday of last week, one of my producers, Stu, asked me, rank the teams 1 through 3 in the Western Conference on you feeling who has the best chance to get to the NBA Finals. And I said 1, Oklahoma City, even with their struggles as of late. I said 2, Denver, and then I ended up putting the Warriors 3. So, I still had a high view of the Nuggets, even with them being 10-13 in their last 23 games. With all that being said, though, my response to you would just be this when you look at them moving forward. Is there a hope for this group, even with what you just said about the interim coach, right, sliding over to become the head coach? Because I look at the news today and I say, at most, as far as this team could go, is probably the second round now.
Listen, they're still hopeful they can go to the finals and win a title. If they didn't think they would not have made this move. This is different. Memphis understood they weren't going anywhere.
Yeah.
Memphis understood with the Salo, he's going to be the permanent guy anyway. They understood this was generally a lost season and ripped the Band-Aid off and get rid of Jenkins. Now, I didn't agree with it, and I would have fired Jenkins last offseason when they stripped him of 5 assistant coaches. But in this situation, they do believe in Adelman. I think one thing's very important to note here, Zach, how terrible Denver's defense has been lately. And I think there's an impression in that ownership group that Michael Malone has publicly trashed his players way too many times, and that there's a thought that he's lost this team and lost this locker room because of the level of public criticism. And it's interesting, last week in postgame, there was a very off-the-cuff comment that Michael Porter Jr. had made along the lines of saying, hey, and it was somewhat matter of fact in the way he said it. If we don't go far this year, they're breaking this group up. And I think that's kind of where Denver is here, is that this is going to be, if they don't go to the finals this year, they're looking to potentially do a reload around Nikola Jokic for the second half of his career. And I think they started this now with the understanding that Mike Malone had worn out his welcome with these players. They were not playing hard for him anymore. That the ownership group tired of this Booth Malone back and forth thing, and that the two of them did not like each other, were not working cooperatively well with one another, and both thought maybe it'd be nice if the other one was out of a job so they didn't have to work with him anymore. And in the end, the Cronkies, listen, they shot first and asked questions later. They got rid of these guys and said, you know what, we're not tolerating this in our organization. For them to do this, I will say this: they have to feel like Adelman gave them a better shot to go win a title this year than Michael Malone, and that doesn't speak as much to the Malone Booth relationship as it speaks to the Malone relationship with his players. One important thing is to note here: I don't believe that Denver checked with Nikola Jokic before they fired Malone, but I am damn positive they checked with Nikola Jokic before they promoted David Adelman. And I would believe that David Adelman has Nikola Jokic's seal of approval to step in and take over as head coach.
What was Nikola Jokic's relationship like with Mike Malone?
Excellent. Always was excellent. Was never an issue. Jokic loved Malone, and Malone was very supportive of Jokic always. And as a matter of fact, when people would try to take shots at Jokic for some of his defensive shortcomings, Michael Malone, who trashed everybody's defense, was the first one to step up and defend him on that end of the floor and actually blame others for some of his shortcomings. So that was a super relationship, to my understanding. And that Jokic really liked Malone a lot. The two of them had a nice relationship. But again, this is the NBA. Zach. Coaches are hired to be fired. It's unfortunate. It's how it works. But if your name is not Popovich or Spoelstra or Kerr, you are susceptible to being fired, no matter what a good job you do. What's very interesting here, and I tweeted this out about 10 minutes before ESPN tweeted this out today. 4 of the last 6 coaches to win an NBA championship have been fired now. Okay, we go back and we look. Nick Nurse, Frank Vogel, Mike Budenholzer, and now Michael Malone. This is the landscape in the NBA. And what's happening is you have a lot of executives in the second apron era that are being punished for bad contracts they've signed. These executives are under fire. In many cases, the move of the executive is go ahead and fire the coach. It saves me a little bit of time. Here, Calvin Booth hadn't built up enough capital with the Cronkies to be able to fire Michael Malone on his own. So they got rid of them both together. One element here that's important to note with the Cronkies, okay? And executives and head coaches are being paid ridiculous amounts of money right now in the NBA. They let Tim Connelly go to Minnesota because they didn't want to give him the amount of money that Minnesota's new ownership group, Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez, were willing to pay Connelly to bring him over. And I think this Denver little mini dynasty that they've had, that's kind of unwinding on this. And that's, listen, a finals appearance in 20, a championship in 23. I think that's unwinding on them a lot of reasons because they were penny wise and pound foolish. Spend on the executive, even if you don't want to go in the tax. You need somebody really good at their job. They let a guy really good at his job go to another organization that, by the way, has their own financial challenges, but still finding a way to thrive under that.
Could you see Brian Geltzeiler, and I know Nikola Jokic, we don't know much about him, even though he's the best player in the NBA and he's a different kind of superstar. Could you see him maybe around the corner or not that far away saying, I'm done with this messy situation in Denver, I want out?
I don't think it's his style. I think he likes where he lives. He's a comfort creature. He enjoys Denver and that Colorado area. He likes to go home over the summer. He's very comfortable where he is. I don't see him asking for a trade. I just don't think that's in his DNA. Now, listen, they could break this whole thing down around him and have it be ugly and him decide maybe I do want to go move somewhere. I'd be really surprised, though. I don't think that's Jokic's style. I think for right now, he wants to see what they do, who they bring in. I'm sure he'll have a little bit of input on some of that. But I'll also say this, Zach, I don't know how much input he wants. He wants to do his job. He wants to play as well as he can play. The guy's as competitive can be. But when it's time to be done doing his job, he wants to go back to Serbia and ride his horses. He wants to have a good time. He likes to gamble. He likes to drink. Like, he's just a fun dude. And I think for him, he doesn't want to have his hands in all this stuff. And I don't even think he cares about perception. I just don't think it's not his job, and he doesn't want to deal with it if it's not his job. So I'd be really surprised if Jokic turns around and says, hey, I want out of here. I think we may see some other stars this summer asking out, Giannis Antetokounmpo being one of them. Ooh. I don't think Nikola Jokic is going to be that guy.
You think so, that the Giannis relationship with the Bucks, I know this has been talked about for years, and I've been a big supporter of keeping Giannis in Milwaukee. You think that's coming to an end?
I do. I will tell you that knowing what I know about Giannis and his desire to win, knowing how the Bucks are completely bereft of assets. And by the way, one of the reasons they are is because Giannis has stepped on their heads and made threats to them in the past. And once a guy makes those threats, that's out there. Milwaukee's bad. And I say they're bad. Giannis is an excellent player, one of the best in the league, second or third best player in the league right now, and is having an amazing, amazing MVP caliber type of year. He will land on my ballot. He won't be the MVP, but he'll land on my ballot on a bad team. And I say they're a bad team. They're in the 5 seed in the conference, but that's how good Giannis is. There's literally nothing around him, and they don't have assets to make moves. And really, quite frankly, if you're the Bucks and you can't win right now with Giannis, your best move is to trade Giannis to reload because he's going to get you a ton as a launching pad for a rebuild. That's your best bet because there's literally no one else on this team right now that has any trade value whatsoever.
First guess, where do you think Giannis is then playing then next year?
Houston. I think it's the one guy that Houston would break up the core for. I don't think Houston breaks up the core for Durant. I think one of the reasons they went and they got the Phoenix picks from the Nets was if Phoenix wants to trade Booker. But I think Matt Ishbia is too hard-headed to want to do that. I think he's going to try to see if he can retool this thing around Booker. I don't think they'll be successful in it. But I think for Houston, they're watching to see what OKC does with keeping the whole thing together and all the young guys. But I do think if Giannis is put in front of them, I think it's way too tempting to not bring him in. And they're the one team that has every piece Milwaukee could want, including a whole ton of picks.
I literally have 70 seconds. Just explain this to me, Brian Geltzeiler. I know the relationship was ugly between Malone and Calvin Booth. Why not just pick one or the other and then reevaluate it at the end of the season?
Because I think the Cronkies were disgusted. I think they see blame on both sides. I think they see Malone not being willing to commit to young guys and give them what's an appropriate opportunity. And I think they see Booth as a guy who didn't really draft guys that were rotation ready when they needed rotation ready players and wants to point his finger at the head coach for not developing them well and not giving them a chance. And I think what happened here is that both sides kept chirping to the owner and the owner had enough. And from that, and by the way, I don't know that to your point, that they fire Malone if they don't have David Adelman waiting in the wings, who is a very, very viable head coaching candidate in the NBA. Again, widely respected and a guy that is thought as a head coach candidate. It's going to be a very, very good coach.
You can follow him on Twitter at BGeltzNBA. Brian Geltzeiler, host of SiriusXM NBA Radio, also contributor to NBA TV. Brian, great to have you on. Really appreciate the insight.
Zach, my pleasure, buddy. Hope to do it again soon. You take care.